There are moments that you reach in your life when you wonder if what you do matters at all. You'll think to yourself, does what I actually do matter? What is the value of my little sphere of influence? This little light of mine, what is the value of this little sphere of influence, given that there are such enormous bad influences round about me? It's a little bit like that moment when you've got the jar of peanut butter around the recycling bin and you're hovering over it, looking inside it at the impossible to clean tub, knowing in the back of your mind, or at least wondering in the back of your mind, that the People's Republic of China don't clean out their peanut butter jars. So should I clean out my peanut butter jar? It's virtually impossible. And all of the moral reasoning and thinking that you've done feels like it's about to fall apart around your eyes. What motivates us then, when we realize just how small and insignificant our influence is? What does it matter, our actions, then? What happens to the reasoning and the moral stances that we've made then, when we realize just how big and how vast the influences and the powers are around about us? And recycling here is the illustration, not the point. The influences around us are huge. So much of what we think, what we value, what we do, is, it feels, already mapped out before us by forces that we didn't choose, and we hardly even notice they're at work. So the question over the sermon is, if our influence is so small and the influences around us are so vast and so big, what does what we do matter at all? What do our motives matter at all? In the story, maybe you noticed, as Jess read it out to us, there are some really big influences in the story. He's not mentioned, but in the backstory there, in chapter 24 and chapter 26, and throughout the book of Samuel, King Saul is still in the picture. Big, bad, mad, and still on the throne. Nabal, or Nabal, as I've been calling him all week until Jess said it differently, whose name, or nickname, more likely, is the Fool. And he's a character that's got power and huge influence, but little in the way of brains. And he's written like an absolute monster. So there's Saul, who's bad and mad. There's Nabal, who's a bit of a monster. And David, the guy that we're all rooting for, the good guy. It won't help that he's hungry, and it won't help that he's harassed. And it looks, if you can remember the tale that's been read before us, like he's just as bad, if not worse, than the other two. And we are heading towards an absolute bloodbath. Loads of innocent blood will be spilt by these three huge, big influences. And we can relate to the idea of these huge, big influences and this helplessness feeling that lots of innocent blood will be spilt. What is the point in our little light and our little life, given that all that is at play? Let me just fill in some of the gaps and sort of summarize verse 2 through to 17. David is on the run with his trusted troops, with his band of brothers who have become, if you can imagine it, like freelance security services, special agent sort of freelance security services. They're putting their skills and their tools to use, given that they're not at war at the moment. And the issue arrives when the harvest comes and the people that David's troops have been looking after just ignore them. They leave them out of the harvest. And on first reading, I was a bit worried that this was a bit of a mafia type situation. David's men, this might be my overactive imagination, but David's men kind of muscle in a protection racket. Protection for payment, whether you like it or not. We're here to help, but make sure you pay us after. And what we've got with Nabal and David is two just like Don Corleone mafia type figures coming together, and there is a bloodbath. That was my first tertiary reading, but it really helps, as always with the Bible, that you dig around and look at it. And it turns out it's not such an uncommon arrangement. Even in parts of the world now, it's not an uncommon arrangement. And when you check out verse 15 and verse 16, the reports of the servants, where they're described as exemplary and essential, you realize it's not a mafia type situation. And I'm looking around at my reference points as I make my examples here. It's a bit more like an A-team situation. It's a bit more like a Magnificent Seven kind of Western kind of situation. They've actually been a real help, a necessary help in these times, and they've not done anything wrong, and they've not asked anything that shouldn't be theirs. And when harvest time has come round, a thank you, a share is appropriate. And that's what David is asking for here. And instead, if you can imagine it, and there's a bit of distance with our culture, but as harvest time comes round, as everybody starts to celebrate, as the tables get set, the food starts to be shared, the party starts, everybody joins in except for David's men, who've been out in the freezing cold risking their necks for the last 12 months. They're all of a sudden unwelcome. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal. I think in a way that's kind of harder to grasp from your UK perspective. But in loads of cultures across the world, and right throughout the Bible, sharing a meal, being hospitable, having hospitality, offering hospitality, is a really serious business. It's a serious business across the world, and it's a really serious business right throughout the Old and the New Testament. It's rich at every point you read about it. Hospitality is rich with significance, rich with meaning. It's what you do all the way through the Bible. It's just what you do when you see people who have need. It's life or death in the cultural times of the Bible. And it's also a lot about God. It's about sharing God's provision that He's blessed you with. It's about obedience to God's commands. And to dig around it a little deeper, I don't know if you knew this, but hospitality is actually on the list of requirements for an elder. And the meaning literally means love. When it's referenced in the New Testament, this idea of hospitality means literally love for strangers. Hebrews tells us to entertain strangers because we might entertain angels without knowing it. And it's not a fanciful suggestion. It's something that actually happened to Abraham in the Old Testament. There's this seriousness about hospitality. And it's perhaps not as we see it through our lenses today, where we think it's about cooking and climbing the social ladder. It's a lot less about cooking and climbing the social ladder, and it's a lot more about recognizing someone who's in need and being open with the provisions that you've been blessed with by a gracious God towards them. It's a serious business. Thankfully, there's a lot of cultural distance between us now in the UK, different culture, different times, than there was in this culture that we're reading into. And that's the place that I rush to hide myself when I think about my hospitality towards other people. But Jesus, I think, speaks words that travel across all cultures, and He speaks words that might still catch us out. He says this in Matthew chapter 25. It's not up on the screens, but you can read it after. And He's speaking about, He's speaking words that you would hear in heaven. And He's talking as a returning king. and he thanks a crowd of people in heaven, prophetically, if you like. And he says to this crowd of people, as the returning king occupying heaven, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me a drink. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. And imagine this conversation in heaven and the people listening in. And apologetically, as Jesus puts it, the crowd look round and say back to him, we don't remember this. We don't remember seeing you. When were you thirsty and we gave you a drink? When were you hungry and we fed you? When were you a stranger to us and we welcomed you in? And Jesus, in this picture of heaven, references the poor and the needy and the outcast. And he says, whatever you did for even one of these, it's like you did it to me. And we would run a mile, and we would jump behind cultural distance, perhaps. And maybe there is a heck of a lot of cultural distance there, and yet I think Jesus' words gently reach us and remind us that God's love, reaching out to your neighbor, it's a serious business. The story moves along, and we're heading towards this inevitable bloodbath, this brawl. Saul in the background is chasing after David. It's almost a bit like a cartoon. David's coming for Nabal. David's chasing after him. He's upset with him. And Nabal, who is a fool, if you can remember from the text, Nabal's busy getting drunk. Saul's chasing David. David's chasing Nabal. Nabal's getting drunk. There's going to be a fight. It's as obvious as night and day. There's going to be blood spill. It's almost certain. In verse 17, you can hear the futility in the servant's voice as he runs back to tell Abigail. It's almost like he realizes there's nothing that we can do about this. All the people at the top are idiots. Maybe you've said that. All the people at the top are idiots. They're just going to run into each other. There's going to be a bloodbath. Our master's an idiot. David's vengeant. Saul's out there. There's no point to any of this. What does it matter? Your little light in a world of huge, big influences. And then we get to the heroine of the story in verse 18. Abigail is this beautiful woman. There's probably a few ways she could get through this situation. Notice especially in verse 18 and 19 just how speedily she acts. We're supposed to get the impression that as soon as she sees what's going on, she's like, this is on me. She speedily acts, she goes straight away, and she goes at huge personal cost. If you can imagine at these times, this beautiful woman making her way across what was a bit of a desert, traveling unbeknownst to and against the will of her powerful husband. With this, did you hear it in the text? It's one of the questions for the kids. This incredible bounty of goods, which is going to make her a sitting duck for all the zillions of robbers that are out there. And then in verse 23, we see that she sets out to reach David. And though she is a woman of status, the writer goes out of their way to tell us the extent to which she shows humility. As soon as she sees David, she drops from her donkey, she collapses to the floor, she puts her face into the ground, not even daring to look up. She humbles herself so that in this horrible set of circumstances, peace might just have a chance. And though this debt was never hers, she knew nothing about it. You can see in the bounty that she gives back to David that risking her own neck, she pays him back with interest in verse 18. Perhaps even more awesome than all of that, maybe. Better than her posture of humility and her present of all of these goods is her genius persuasion. I've used a little bit of alliteration there. I'm scared you might miss it, so I want to point it out. Better than a posture or her present is her persuasion. So just scan over verse 28 to 31, what she's going to say to him. Because she knows what David's problem really is. This is her wisdom coming out. She knows exactly what his problem is, and she knows what words to say and which buttons to press. So I've got to tell you a little bit about David here. And as I saw David in this moment, I guess I saw glimpses of myself, and I saw glimpses of loads of other people at the same time. Even though he's on the run from the baddies, in inverted commas, from violent people who are looking to kill him and murder him, his biggest risk, and Abigail sees this, his biggest risk isn't them. It's himself. His biggest risk isn't what Nabal is going to do to him, this fool. That's not his biggest risk. That's not his biggest worry. His biggest risk, and Abigail sees this, is the person he will become as he is pressed upon by his enemies. That's his biggest risk. This king, this anointed king, this guy who's been on this learning journey, and his biggest risk, even with all this threat, is the person that he might become when he's faced with his enemy. If you read back in the last chapter, there's a story where David meets Saul in a cave, and he's learnt a lesson that maybe he's learnt a few times. He's got the chance to kill Saul and grab the throne for himself, but he learns to leave it be. And he says something like, "Vengeance is the Lord's." And he realizes that God gives the best victories, and he says, I don't need to use force. I don't need to take action here. And yet, just a chapter later, just moments later, how often is that in the story of our lives? When he's pressed by an enemy, he forgets all the lessons that he's learnt. He wants to take matters into his own hands. And we, the reader, get to see a monster, one that looks nothing like the kind of king God would anoint. Maybe it's a simple lesson, maybe you won't have it. It's worth saying, I think, and I think it's a good lesson. Our biggest problems might not be the obvious things that are coming after us. They might not be the enemies that we look at, people usually. They might well be who we turn into when we're faced with people that act like our enemies, that press our buttons, that bring us threat. It's sort of darkly interesting, I think. It's a dark story, actually, when we see David, the supposed good guy, turning like this. That he says a couple of times, not one of them is going to survive. In terms of who's wronged him, it's largely Nabal. And yet he says, I'm going to kill them all. Bitterness has taken hold of him. And bitterness, I don't know if you have this, it might just be me, but bitterness tends to spread, doesn't it? We can be wronged by one person or one moment, and generally, or quite often, we can share that bitterness around, often at people who are innocent and haven't done anything wrong. And it can often be the case that when we act in bitterness, see the way that it's taken hold of David's life? That's what bitterness does. It's just grabbed hold of him deep inside him. It can often be the case that when we act in bitterness, we strike terminal blows, not to other people, but actually to ourselves. And Abigail sees that for what it is. In verse 31, she maps that out for him. You're going to have blood on your hands, David. You're going to not act at all like a king. You're going to undermine all of this work that God is doing in you. Just because your enemy has a hold on you. Don't know if you have that in your life. Don't know if you've got anybody that you would dare call an enemy. Don't know if you've ever stopped to see the rot, to be able to look at your own self. I found that to be really interesting and neglectful way to put it. It hit me hard when I thought about the way that we can often view our biggest threats as other people, and actually the biggest threat is not other people, it's what we can become, sin, you might say. But Abigail's not without hope, even here, to turn it around. Hear what she says in verse 28. This is genius, is this? What she does in this moment with this little light. There's some huge influences. She's got a tiny window of opportunity. Look at what she says. See if you can spot the genius. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God, look at what she's trying to get him to see, what she's trying to get him to do. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live, even though someone is pursuing you to take your life. The life of my Lord, this is a lovely little sentence. The life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. And then she plants a seed that's so cool, so smart. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. See what she puts in his head? See the seed that she plants, the genius, the wisdom in her words to turn this situation around. She reminds him that this battle, like all of the other battles, are God's battles. They're all God's battles, battles that he will win. And then she sneaks one particular battle into his mind. Can you spot it? This is one that any size of person can kind of get. It's a Sunday school favorite. The lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. David, as soon as she dropped that little pearl of wisdom under his nose, probably imagined himself that feeling of glorious victory, the whoosh of the stone as it raced towards Goliath's head no sooner than she'd said it. Even his own famous cries, "The Lord saves not with sword or spear, the battle is the Lord's." And David would have remembered really clearly that even though he had the sling and the stones in his hand, it was God who slayed Goliath, God who slayed the giant. What she's reminded him of is that he's going to be king. He's going to win this battle ultimately, not because he determines it, but because God has promised it. And God keeps his promises. And she says to David, or she puts in his mind, you've already seen the way that God wins these victories. Now, David has a lot of flaws, and he has a lot of strengths too. Poet, handsome fella, great fighter, great warrior, great leader, but maybe his greatest strength, and you might see this when you read through if you go away and read through Psalm 51, is his capacity to hear. And I don't know many leaders who've got this gift, who is able to hear about himself and reflect on himself and hear the truth about himself and think about what he might do to change that. This is the power of the gospel. At the end of this story, you can see, even though there are these horrible influences, even though there is the certainty of bloodshed, there is the possibility of peace. There is peace. And this little light of Abigail's shines through. This is the gospel. This is the good news that we've got. This is our story. Tell me about it. You've got enemies. Seems odd to talk in those terms, doesn't it? But there's a truth to that. We've got threats out there. There are battles for us to fight. There are injustices that we will face. There are fears that we will definitely hold, that will grip us. There are hurts that we will carry about with us. There are people out there who are hell-bent on breaking us. But the good news of the gospel and the good news of this story is These are all God's battles. This is the wisdom of the persuasion of the gospel, and this is what Abigail's saying. She looks at David in this present circumstance and she says, this battle that you're looking at now, this enemy that you've got now, this is the same fight that you had with Goliath, and God won that. All of these battles, our fears, our dreads, the people, our circumstances, these are God's battles. We don't go into them on our own. We would be, to use Nabal as an example, we would be fools to think that we would be like David, rolling our sleeves up to take on some of these things. That is the good news of the gospel. We don't go on our own. We go in the knowledge that God has the victory. And I think the beautiful story of the gospel is that in the same way that Abigail whispered a battle into David's ear, God whispers one into our ears. We never get very far away from the cross. Nobody does. It's on the horizon of nearly every culture across the world. And it probably will feel at times that you are fighting for your life. And the reminder of this battle is that we aren't fighting for our lives, not because life's not tough, but because He already has. The question for all of us, as we think about getting angry like David, or we think about giving up, or we think about the worth of our little light, is will we be able to hear that message? We don't have to go and fight on our own. We just have to hear it and stand. So, as you stand and hover angrily over the recycling bin with your peanut butter jar in your hand, aware, allegedly, that the People's Republic of China have got no policy on peanut butter jars, and you're wondering about your influence, and you're aware that your little light in the world is going to get swallowed up by all of those zillions of bad ones, and as your convictions start to disintegrate around about you, please remember, Abigail says, God won. And the lights that point to Him matter. And they won't go out, and they will cut